This is a statement from Donald Trump, quote, "We have completed our very successful attack on the 3 nuclear sites in Iran," etc.
That's Tulsa, Oklahoma. No more war. Bernie rally.
I agree. And I want to tell you something. Not only is this news that I've just heard the second alarming that all of you have just heard, but it is so grossly unconstitutional. All of you know that the only entity that can take this country to war is the U.S. Congress. The president does not have the right.
Hell yeah. So it's time to bring it, folks. It's time to bring the anti-war movement. You have Bernie in Oklahoma leading the charge as he finds out on stage that Donald Trump has attacked 3 nuclear sites inside of Iran, a country that has not attacked the United States, that was not about to attack the United States, and a country that U.S. intelligence itself said had no military nuclear program. And yet, they've gone to war. Absolutely ridiculous. Welcome to episode 11 of The Left Unsaid, where we bust through the bunkers of the calcified cliches that bury the radioactive truths. But we use missiles of love. Thank you to Left Unsaid, and welcome to my son, Finn McElwee.
Hello.
And my life and my wife, Meg McElwee.
Love you, sweetie. Hi, everyone.
And I am one of your hosts. I'm Patrick McElwee, and I'm happy to be here, although I'm not happy about the circumstances, I gotta say.
Not at all.
No.
If you're not happy either and you want to continue following us, please do hit like and subscribe wherever you're listening. And, you know, if you have a different platform you prefer, we have published this thing pretty much everywhere. So episode 11 of The Left Unsaid. And unfortunately, last night, we're recording this on Sunday, Trump bombed Iran.
Right. We had to rework our whole plan here.
Great. I mean, Meg, is that the biggest problem with it? But it's true. We did have to rework all of our notes.
We did.
Yeah, and a clear violation of international law, U.S. law, moral law, basically every kind of law. The U.S. launched bombers that struck Iran's 3 most prominent nuclear facilities in an attempt to use their bunker buster bombs to destroy them.
And I think they were so salivating at using their bunker buster bombs because
they like alliteration.
They've had these things in storage for years and years and years. They've been developing them. They've been paying people tons of money to develop them, and now they get to use them in real life, and boy, do they love that. We're going to bring you all the news from Trump's attack on Iran later in the show, but, you know, I don't think we could even say it better than this guy, Trump's strongest critic. He said it a few years back, but I think it still holds true. We got to give this guy some props. Let's listen in.
Our president will start a war with Iran because he has absolutely no ability to negotiate. He's weak and he's ineffective.
Take that, Trump.
Trump v. Trump.
Yeah, that's Trump. That's Trump under Obama, back when Obama was negotiating a nuclear agreement with Iran, did negotiate a nuclear agreement with Iran, had Iran's agreement not to develop a nuclear weapon. And in fact, Iran, even outside of that agreement, which Trump himself tore up, is a party to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. They have atomic weapons inspectors visiting Iran up until now, of course, and they've blown everything up. Throw that out the window. I'm going to be so surprised if Iran doesn't have a bomb within 5 to 10 years after this. They'll do it in secret, and it's all thanks to Trump and the insanity of the Israelis that relentlessly hounded the United States into taking this illegal action. But we'll get into it later in the program.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if everyone in the region gets a bomb. I wouldn't be surprised at all if other countries in the Middle East want their own nukes, because, you know, clearly, why would anyone trust, you know, the U.S. or these nuclear countries in negotiations anymore if, you know, you can play by all the rules like Iran did from the very beginning and still get blown up basically on a whim?
Well said. But first, these updates.
Mahmoud Khalil has been released.
Woo!
Finally.
Yes.
Ray of sunshine.
That's a beautiful thing to see. The man had a baby while he was locked up.
I mean, can you imagine that?
And his wife, I mean, like, their first baby too. I mean, you remember what it was like having a first kid.
I can't imagine.
So she had to see her husband abducted when she was 9 months pregnant?
Yeah, 8 months pregnant, I think.
And if you remember, Mahmoud Khalil was one of the first abductees by ICE agents. And he was targeted because he was the lead negotiator for the students in the encampments at Columbia University.
Very measured speaker, very calm guy. If you want to know a little bit more about his backstory, I highly suggest watching The Encampments.
Great documentary. Where can you see it?
You can see it on Watermelon Plus.
Yeah, Watermelon Plus, this new streaming service for films that identify with the humanity of Palestinians. I highly recommend getting a subscription to Watermelon Plus. Support these people out here making these important films.
We're not sponsored.
We're not sponsored yet. No, we don't intend to get sponsored. We intend to sponsor them because we sponsor their project. We endorse it. We need to shine a light on the Palestinians and the plight of the Palestinians. But more of that to come. Mahmoud Khalil is a fighter in that, and seeing him released is just absolutely magnificent.
Yeah, and I think it's a ray of hope for all students who are being unfairly targeted and singled out for their anti-genocide, pro-humanity stance on campuses nationwide and in general, pro-Palestinian advocates here in the U.S.
Now, we do have to say he's not out of the woods yet, not out of the legal woods anyway. He's out on bail, and so still faces deportation from this country. But he's known his entire life. He was born a Palestinian refugee in Syria. If you hear him talk about it, they ask, what are you going to do if you get deported? And he says, I'll continue the fight. He's known that he's had this fight imposed on him since before he was born, as all the Palestinians have. And he's always known he was going to face repercussions and face repression and face the deaths of family members and face the prospect of deportation for simply speaking up for the humanity of the people to which he was born. Thank you, Mahmoud Khalil. Well, speaking of ICE, the ICE raids have continued. We continue to see masked, out-of-uniform men grabbing people in courtrooms, etc. I mean, the speculation has grown out there. Are these really ICE officers, or are they deputized thugs of some kind?
I heard you could order an ICE patch on Amazon and just put it on the back of your combat vest or whatever.
Yeah, I've seen those reports that people are imitating ICE, buying things on Amazon. But on the other hand, ICE is imitating regular people. I mean, the whole problem is that they're not wearing the ICE logo. They're not wearing their badge. They're wearing everyday clothes and they're masked up.
I mean, they're kidnapping people. As a woman, also, this is quite concerning to just,
Absolutely. But on the more positive side of the ledger, the Senate Parliamentarian, if you remember her back from the fight over Joe Biden's surprisingly good, what was it called? Build Back Better bill. When the Senate Parliamentarian, who's this little known, well, maybe not little known anymore, but sort of an obscure official within the Senate, not elected, who gets to rule on whether a bill can be brought through a fast-track process in the Senate. When I say fast-tracked, I mean the way you get a bill to be passed by a simple majority in the Senate. Because the Senate has this rule, the filibuster, that means you have to get to 60 votes in almost every case, unless it's a budget bill. They got rid of the filibuster just for budget bills, and the Senate Parliamentarian gets to tell you whether what you're doing is budgetary or it's actually something different. Usually the something different means you're setting some kind of policy or you're playing some kind of accounting shenanigans. So she came up with her first ruling yesterday that what we all think of as food stamps, the SNAP program, cannot be cut as part of the big, beautiful bill, which is a huge part of the cuts. They wanted to pay for these tax cuts to the top 0.001% by cutting food literally into the mouths of children in poverty.
Despicable.
And so we got off on a technicality on that one. And the Senate Parliamentarian is going to continue to be releasing these rulings, I understand, over the next few days.
So is this an official, there's no more debate over it? It is what it is?
It's only official because there is a group of senators on both the Republican and the Democratic side who insist on it being official. Manchin, back under the Biden days, was the Democratic senator who opposed overriding the Senate Parliamentarian when she said you couldn't expand the child tax credit, for example, as part of one of these budget bills. But you've got now senators on the other side, on the Republican side of the aisle, who for their caucus aren't going to allow this to go forward, is what they've said. And so that's why it continues to be in effect, just because some senators are enforcing it. So we'll keep an eye on that. We'll at some point in the future, when things calm down, hopefully, we'll be able to have a longer update on what this stupid, beautiful bill has in it. And we're recording this on Sunday, but by the time this comes out, it's either going to be Election Day or the day after Election Day.
In New York City.
For Zohran Mamdani v. Cuomo, Andrew Cuomo.
Oh, exciting.
You know, I shouldn't be surprised, but again, am astounded at the scale of the mobilization of the Democratic Party when it comes to beating down a left-wing candidate who stands a chance of winning. I mean, they pull out all the stops.
All the stops. So much money.
$20 million they're spending against him like this weekend.
One person, one billionaire, Michael Bloomberg, donated around $8 million to Cuomo's super PAC, which is the same amount of money that Zohran Mamdani raised from well over 20,000 individual donors across the city. And that's all, Zohran can raise because of limits if you're not, supported by a huge super PAC with all your wealthy donors. But that's the scale we're talking about here. These are people that can just match the contributions of tens of thousands of people with the blink of an eye.
And look, we are witnessing oligarchy at its most disgusting in this race.
Yeah, I'd say it's a theme of the show. It's going to be a theme of the show is when the oligarchy flexes, we notice. Sometimes it sits latent and we don't notice, but when it flexes and it waits until someone like Zohran is about to get an important position like the mayor of New York, or Bernie Sanders was about to get the Democratic nomination, and they flex. And that's what you see. That's the money coming from Bloomberg. It's also where the most important servants of the oligarchy come out of the woodwork and play their function.
Right, like Jim Clyburn.
Yeah, like Jim Clyburn from South Carolina, making robocalls all over New York City. From South Carolina, making robocalls all over New York City to try to smear Zohran. Like this guy, Whitney, what's his name?
Whitney Tilson.
Whitney Tilson, financier. Yeah, he's one of the candidates in the mayoral race, and he's just basically going around smearing Zohran with the big smear, the anti-Semitism smear, which is also the one that they always trot out when capitalism or the interests of the oligarchy are truly threatened. Not only in this country, but you saw what happened to Jeremy Corbyn, left-wing leader of the Labour Party some years back in Britain, and they used anti-Semitism to bring him down. This just outrageous smears.
It's like if nothing else works, they always have that in their back pocket.
And remind me who's obsessed about Israel again?
Yeah, I mean, by all accounts, it's a very close race. So far, we've seen a huge turnout, more than double what it was last time in early voting. And young people have turned out at a rate much higher than in previous elections, which is probably good for Zohran. There is a big heat wave coming on Election Day, if I understand correctly. And some people fear that could keep older voters from voting, which again would probably be good for Zohran because, his base is mostly young and energetic and tuned into news sources other than mainstream media, which, like the New York Times are constantly smearing Zohran for the interests of, their wealthy owners and donors. But by all accounts, this is still a race. It's still winnable. So we'll see.
So Finn, as a young person who doesn't live in New York, who can't vote, what excites you about it? Why are you so jazzed?
I mean, it's the first time since Bernie, I would say, where you have this young candidate who seems to want to actually help everyday people. And, is not afraid to name the enemy, the people who are hoarding money at the top at the expense of, healthcare, education for everyone else, childcare in New York City is a big issue, especially. And, he's actually, it seems to me, committed to doing everything he can to distribute some of those resources that have been stolen from the working class and make the rich really pay their fair share in taxes.
Yeah. And this is coming from Finn, who at 10 years old, you were phone banking for Bernie. So this isn't your first progressive campaign of hope, but hopefully Zohran will be able to push through the glass ceiling, so to speak.
Totally winnable race at this point. It's probably too late, but if you happen to be hearing this on Tuesday and you happen to live in New York City, please go out and cast your vote. we'd advocate, and we can because we're not taking any money from anybody. We're doing this for free, that you rank Mamdani and do not rank Andrew Cuomo. That's the most important thing.
That's right.
All right, so we got to come back to the big story of the day, I think. So we don't know at this point whether Iran is going to retaliate against the United States. The United States has bases all over the region within range of Iran's missiles. Iran is clearly within its rights to respond and has said that publicly. If you get attacked by another country aggressively for no reason, under international law, you're allowed to respond. And it's important for us to say that because what could happen here is that Iran could retaliate in this way on a U.S. base, and soldiers who have been positioned far away on the other side of the world could be killed as a result of what Trump did last night.
I read somewhere that there are about 40,000 troops stationed over there.
And when it happens, it's going to be really important to resist the effect, the rally around the flag effect that they are hoping for.
Yeah, please do not.
In Israel, they're hoping for it. Because, despite what gets said all the time, this is not about stopping Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. If they wanted to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, they wouldn't have pressured Trump and the Republicans in the United States so hard to tear up the nuclear deal that Obama negotiated. And when Obama negotiated it, there were efforts to scuttle it then before it ever took effect, before it was ever signed in ink. I mean, that agreement would have ensured that Iran couldn't get a nuclear weapon. They were sending inspectors. I mean, could they have in some future where the Iranian regime decided to be completely suicidal, tear up the agreement, develop a nuclear bomb, and then commit suicide by throwing it over at Iran, by throwing it over at Israel or another U.S. ally? Sure, there's some future science fiction world in which that could have happened. There's some future possible world, but that wasn't the world we lived in. The fact that they tore up the nuclear agreement shows you that they don't care about Iran getting a nuclear weapon. What Israel and the neocons and the war hawks want to happen is they want a perpetual war with Iran. Maybe they don't want it to be troops on the ground. They don't want it to be a hot war all the time, but they want something like what they've done in Gaza for the last several decades, which is they mow the lawn. That's how they put it. Dropping bombs on the heads of people. They call it mowing the lawn.
Oh, so disgusting.
And that's what they want to do with Iran. So make no mistake, this is about an ongoing, perpetual conflict between the United States and Iran. That's what Israel wants. That's what the neocons want. And that's what we've got to resist.
It makes a lot of people a lot of money. Perpetual war.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what the war industry wants. We should always be clear about that. There's the Israel lobby, which is important, as I've been saying. But you're right, Meg. The war industry wants this. And that is not a small industry.
Right. Palantir wants this,
Absolutely. And Palantir are just the ones who are willing to say it out loud.
Yeah, I mean, the military-industrial complex, as it's known, has influence over almost every single elected representative because, they've positioned their bases strategically and their weapons manufacturing strategically throughout the country so that there will be more jobs in everyone's district if, we have to make more missiles to shoot at children. And so it makes it very hard for representatives to go against the military-industrial complex.
Right.
And it substitutes for industrial policy in the United States. The fact that we have this just enormous military debt, it dwarfs every other country. You could combine the next 8 countries, and you still haven't reached the size of the military budget of the United States. And make no mistake, if you're developing these missiles, watching them dropped on the heads of human beings is part of that development. It's part of your work. Their work is to destroy human life, destroy human habitation, and it's sick.
And I just want to come back briefly to the AIPAC lobby. In the run-up to this, Drop Site News came out with a joint investigation with American Prospect. And apparently in the days and the week before this happened, the Israeli lobby flooded Congress with calls, emails, and talking points urging Democratic lawmakers to, quote, to state that they stood with Israel and to declare that Iran must, quote, never have a nuclear weapon. They launched attacks on, this is AIPAC, they launched attacks on J Street, which is a more moderate Israeli lobby, and they warned members not to align with J Street's policies. And the Democratic staffers, they described this absolutely intense, this bombardment of a political lobby campaign. They're getting just hundreds and hundreds of calls and emails and whatnot aimed all at silencing dissent on the issue of attacking Iran.
And it's the very same lobby that mobilized, and not just them, because we have so many of the very same people who mobilized to sell the war in Iraq back in 2003. Those of us who lived through it won't forget it, especially those of us who are paying attention to the case they were making. It was an absurd case.
Absolutely absurd case.
Like today, an absurdity. Like today, they claimed that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction when they had no evidence for it. In fact, they had very good evidence that Iraq didn't have weapons of mass destruction, and they misled everyone. And it was farcical. It couldn't have happened, except that all of the members of the media went along with it.
Manufacturing consent.
And that's what we're seeing them try to do again. But it's the very same people, or it's their ghoulish successors today that you see on there. It's these careerists, smart people who speak well, who get on TV, and they know on which side the toast is buttered. And so at moments like this, they join the oligarchy, the war machine, and they manufacture consent, just like you said, Meg.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing that with, very liberal. I've listened to, MSNBC, CNN, the New York Times. They've all basically gone along with this line that, Iran, one, is close to or has the ability to very quickly develop a nuclear weapon, which is false. I mean, it's not true. They've not been trying to develop a nuclear weapon. But two, they also go along with this notion that Iran would immediately use this nuclear weapon on, the United States or Israel or whatever. And so it's an existential threat that has to be preempted by, Israel's attacks on Iran, now the U.S.'s attacks on Iran. And, none of these notions are true. They're again, just manufacturing consent.
The other thing that is really bothering me in the manufacturing of consent in this war with Iran is the liberal feminists jumping on this bandwagon and using women in Iran as basically as a reason that they need to go in and liberate the women of Iran. This is an argument that I've seen lots of people make, especially women here in the United States. For example, this is a comment that we received from an acquaintance of ours, just criticizing our criticism of the war in Iran. She says, so just to be clear, you're defending a regime that brutally suppresses women's rights, et cetera, et cetera. And she says, you say you don't want war. None of us do. But looking the other way, while Iran terrorizes its own people, yada, 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 yada. And then she says again, you want to talk about injustice? Start with the women of Iran, etc. Okay, this is neocolonialism, people. And I cannot stand when women here in the United States say that we have to bomb women elsewhere to get them their rights. That is just ridiculous. And also ridiculous is the claim that Iranian women are somehow being exceptionally marginalized by the Islamic regime there. This is not true. Let's look at the the literacy rates for Iranian women. For ages 15 to 24, 99% literacy rate. Overall, for all ages, 85.5%. Which is higher than the male literacy rate there in Iran, which is overall 80.8%. Now, 99% literacy rate, this is in 2022, that is the same as the U.S. And it is interestingly more than the literacy rate for Israeli society, which is 96.8%. We see this in Palestine, 97% literacy rate for the women there, which is pretty remarkable given the challenges faced while they're under occupation, the fact that we bomb their schools and bomb their universities and, everything was shut down there. Same with Iran, under huge economic sanctions, they still manage to have an exceptionally high literacy rate. Egypt, for example, female literacy rate, 65.5%. India, 65.8%. I don't see any women clamoring here to overthrow and to, push their regime change onto India or Egypt because of those lower literacy rates. So basically, what happened, Article 20 of the Constitution of the Islamic Republic of Iran says that, quote, this is a quote, all human beings, regardless of gender, are equal in human, political, economic, social, and cultural rights. Now, you can split hairs about how exactly that plays out, but you can also split hairs about how it plays out here in the United States. Now, in Iran, 65% of university students are women, plus the number of female graduates in STEM fields exceeds the number of male graduates in STEM fields. I didn't look up exactly how we're doing in the United States here, but I also know that to be true here in general, that there are more female students in the university system than males. And you can also make the argument that people will say, oh, well, they might be super well educated, but they don't have the same representation in jobs that their male counterparts do. You could say the same here in the US. For example, let's take the evangelical Christian population, even, a more right-wing Catholic population, say, and you could make the argument that, yes, that the women there, they may have great educations, but they are choosing either personally or, in consultation or, even perhaps without consultation of their male partners to stay home and raise their kids. Perhaps they're able to do that economically here in the U.S. I don't know. That's their thing. I'm not going to step in as someone on the left and say that is wrong. Every woman has to be in the workforce. That's their thing. I'm not going to police their way of being a woman in the world. And I don't think that the liberals should be doing the same thing for the women in Iran. They are clearly highly educated. They can fight their fight, and we should be very hands-off about that. It's very dangerous, and it is super neo-colonial to suppose that women here in the United States, in Israel, that they should have any standing to be making judgments about how Iranian women move about in their society. It just reeks of neocolonialism, the same way that the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank were set up after the old structure of empire and colonialism started to crumble and there started to be nationalization of these resources that were previously just extracted by the empire, by the oligarchy, and into, Europe and the US. And it shifted. They also use this argument of feminism to impose economic and legislative requirements that continue to benefit the ruling elites, former colonial overlords, and now multinational corporations that are continuing to pull resources away from countries. This is neocolonialism, people, and feminism is being used as a neocolonial weapon to continue to exploit countries in the global south. They want to do it with Iran. They want Iran's resources. They can't stand it because we don't have access to them. Remember, let's never forget the United States, the CIA, with the help of the British, overthrew a democratically elected secular leader, Mohammad Mossadegh, in 1953 because he nationalized Iran's oil. And that was a big no-no. If you want to see why this is happening, go back to 1953. They do not like it when the global south exerts its power over its own natural resources. Don't buy in to some liberal Zionist who comes into your text messages or whatnot and says, oh, but the women in Iran. I'm sorry, that is not your place to say that.
And it's one thing to have solidarity with people who are suffering, with women who are suffering because of the actions of the government in Iran. Absolutely. Cross-class solidarity with them.
Sure.
Cross-national solidarity. Let's have a universalist humanism. We don't have to give up on that. But to pretend that this bombing campaign is a path to liberation is a farce.
It's absolutely a farce.
I mean, one of my favorite chants from, again, the Iraq War days, war and occupation will never lead to liberation.
That's bullshit. Get off it.
This war is for profit. Great one.
Yeah.
I know, and sadly becoming more and more relevant every day.
Anyway, I hate it when feminism is used as a tool of neocolonialism. The oligarchy doesn't want to liberate Iranian women. They are using feminism as a Trojan horse. It's a method of manufacturing consent, but their real goal is regime change so the oligarchy can install a Western-friendly government that allows them to extract Iran's resources for their own enrichment and exploitation.
So I want to lean into this manufacturing consent. But before I do, I just want to say, we're going to talk a lot about how Americans feel about what's happening. And I think there's reason to hope that Americans are not fully on board with this war, at least not fully on board yet with this war. But I also want to be clear, it doesn't just matter what public opinion is, because public opinion doesn't translate directly to policy. If you're not activated yet, if you haven't yet gotten into the anti-war fight, you got to get activated now. This is one of those moments where we just don't have the luxury of sitting around and watching politics as a spectator sport. You got to get involved. I'm going to put a couple of links in the show notes to the Council on American Islamic Relations. They've got some easy ways where you can contact your representative and contact your senators. They've got scripts to make it easy, and they basically will connect you directly to their offices. And please start taking action. Do whatever you feel like you can do to contribute to the anti-war movement, because just having an opinion isn't going to be enough. The oligarchy is flexing, and we've got to flex back. All right, but speaking of U.S. public opinion, there is some reason to hope. I mean, I want to just read what Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, crazy right-wing Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, said after the strike on Iran, after Trump was already claiming victory. Her Trump, she's part of the MAGA movement. And she says, quote, "Every time America's on the verge of greatness, we get involved in another foreign war. There would not be bombs falling on the people of Israel if Netanyahu had not dropped bombs on the people of Iran first." Man, imagine hearing that from the top Democrats, right?
Right.
Marjorie Taylor Greene continues, "Israel is a nuclear-armed nation. This is not our fight. Peace is the answer." I mean, she came back. I was seeing on Twitter and watching some of her activity, and she did clap back because AOC also had a very similar tweet that continued on by calling for Trump's impeachment. AOC being Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez from New York, progressive, member of the squad, amazing, touring the country with Bernie. And Marjorie Taylor Greene clapped back, and I forget what she called her, but she basically was like, "Shut up, you idiot," to AOC, I guess because otherwise she loses her brand.
Yeah. Their thinking is, we're just about to kill the left. We're just about to squash them and then deport everybody. Why are you messing it up now? But, I'll take any reason you have for being against useless foreign intervention by the United States and U.S. imperialism.
And she has this nutty kind of thing where she says America's on the verge of greatness,
Which is code for kicking out all the brown and black people or putting them all behind bars or whatever, yeah.
They talk about it in terms of Western civilization and so on. But we need some kind of coalition against war with Iran. So it's hopeful that there has been this emergence of anti-war sentiment, which is understandable because people throughout the country have been asked to sacrifice deeply for wars that weren't that long ago. Afghanistan and Iraq just weren't that long ago. When the war in Iraq happened, Vietnam was already 30 years in the past. But this time, we're only looking back 20 years. And so many more people who are active politically can remember Iraq and the lies. And so it's not so easy to fool them again.
Yeah, and people like Donald Trump campaigned on, no more forever wars and kind of seemingly capturing this popular indignation about the fecklessness of these forever wars. So I don't imagine it will be easy to manufacture consent for this war.
And just as a couple other examples of how MAGA itself has been divided in the run-up to this attack, I was going to play a lot more clips from this amazing interview that Tucker Carlson did with Senator Ted Cruz. Tucker Carlson is his former Fox News commentator, if you haven't come across him before. Very famous.
Been around for a while.
He was kicked off Fox News, but he took his audience to social media, and he's been doing quite well for himself out there. He's got some crazy nationalist, maybe white supremacist views, but he's found his way to these anti-war positions. Let's just listen to the way he treats Ted Cruz, this Republican senator, came up through the Tea Party, very right-wing guy, the kind of hawk who sells all kinds of wars to the American people. Here's what he asks them about Iran. It's quite illuminating.
How many people live in Iran, by the way?
I don't know the population.
At all?
No, I don't know the population.
You don't know the population of the country you seek to topple? What's the ethnic mix of Iran?
They are Persians and
What percent?
predominantly Shia. Okay, this is cute.
It's not
Okay.
even. You don't know anything about Iran. So
Okay,
actually,
I
the
am
country,
not the Tucker Carlson expert on Iran.
You're a
who
senator
says,
who's calling for the
you're one who
overthrow of the
claims-
government.
You're the one
and
who
you don't know
claims
anything about the country.
Wow.
Amazing. Okay. So, maybe you listen to this and you're like, well, I don't really know the population of Iran either. Or maybe I don't really know the ethnic mix of the population either. Maybe it's unfair. It's not an unfair question. Ted Cruz is going around advocating for the overthrow of the government of Iran. And he doesn't even understand basic things like the size of Iran. Had he known something about the size of Iran, he could have ventured a guess. He could have said somewhere around 100 million, or he could have said, oh, it's like some 75 to 85 million. He could have guessed and been in the ballpark, and that would have been okay, right? I don't think anyone needed him to know it was like precisely 88 million people who live in Iran. But to not even know the approximate size, because if he hasn't taken the time to know the approximate population of the country that he seeks to attack, whose government he seeks to overthrow, well, he probably doesn't know the approximate size of Iraq either. He probably doesn't know that Iran is like 3 times the population of Iraq. So think about all the chaos that happened after Saddam was toppled in Iraq. Well, Iran's a much larger, a very complicated government, and he hasn't even taken the time to know that.
Even like the topography of Iran makes it a particularly complicated place too.
Absolutely. Does he know which minorities there are in Iran? Does he know what groupings are likely to have the most power? Does he know anything about whether a civil war is likely to break out, or if there's going to be sectarian ethnic cleansing within neighborhoods inside Tehran?
So you see how easy these politicians are to manipulate because they don't know the facts and they can just listen to a Bibi Netanyahu or their AIPAC handling person and they just spew these whatever is given to them, and they just say whatever they need to say by the people who are paying their fancy vacations and their extra yacht and their extra house and whatever. They're these sort of blank slates that are just so susceptible to manipulation.
And they can fail up and up and up. That's why there's been no accountability for what happened, for all the lies that were told back in the days of Iraq, why all the media members who didn't ask the hard questions, who sometimes now come out and apologize, but they haven't failed. They've gone up and up and up and up because Ted Cruz's job isn't to know the facts. His job is to serve the oligarchy, the war interest, the Israel lobby. And that's what he does. So he's an intentionally know-nothing. He's not a stupid guy. He went to Harvard. He's a great debater. That's how he got his start, doing all kinds of debates. He's a smart guy. He could find this out if he wanted to, but he doesn't because he's a careerist who wants to fail his way to the top. But Tucker's pushing back. I mean, Tucker really got him in that video. And there's plenty more.
Isn't it a 2-hour-long video?
Yeah, he sat down for a 2-hour interview. He's got things where he really questions whether the United States is serving Israel's interest rather than the U.S. interest. I just wanted to go to this last clip here where Tucker tries to explain a little bit of why he's anti-war. And I think it's just worth listening to. Especially for us, because we're inside of our little bubble, and there's this other bubble over there that's against the war, and it's good for us to try to figure out why.
I am the product of the last 25 years, watching carefully, being involved in the periphery, and I see an unending string of foreign policy disasters that have impoverished and hurt our country.
Unending string.
Unending string. They would include Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, and our inability to stop the Houthis, by the way, in Yemen, which exposes us as weak, and I grieve over that. So these are failures. You helped preside over some of them as a member of the Senate.
What failures, foreign policy failures, have I presided over?
Well, we were unable to beat Russia in the war that you supported against Russia.
I mean, it's quite a list.
Yeah.
I'll note the aggression towards the Houthis.
Right.
But
it seems like that perhaps the animus for Tucker is the fact that we didn't win rather than, that you're killing people and, putting lives in danger. It's this like, you kind of went out there stupidly, and it shows that our military isn't as amazing as, we'd hoped it was.
And it's not. You're right. I think the war hawks are always looking for a repeat of World War II. But you don't get an outcome as clean after a process as horrific as World War II every day or every century. Hopefully never again.
That's an interesting point. Because, World War II history is really venerated.
Ever present.
In the U.S.
And mythologized. I mean, the Russians had beaten the Germans by the time D-Day ever happened. I'm not saying D-Day wasn't heroic, and I'm not saying it wasn't important. It was. But a lot of D-Day was about beating the Russians to Berlin. The Russians took the brunt of it. We don't have to go. I won't go into World War II, but...
Maybe in a future episode.
There's a lot of mythologizing, and it all gets brought up. Okay, so we have this group of people on the right who doesn't want it. Steve Bannon himself seemed to be very much against this attack on Iran.
Steve Bannon, not a good guy.
But obviously, together they weren't enough to stop Trump. So there was a recent poll, I believe, on U.S. public opinion on war with Iran.
60% of Americans oppose attacking Iran, and only 16% want to go to war. It's very similar between Democrats and Republicans. Over half of Republicans opposed, while less than a quarter supported.
Yeah, so we're seeing this alignment between Democrats and Republicans opposed to war. But I want to go to this clip from CNN. This guy who does polling on CNN and shows the numbers up there, Harry Enter. He gets up there and he tries to tell the story of the polling as favorable toward the war position as possible. And I think it's really instructive on how these people manufacture consent, how they can be so focused on fact-checking Trump and performing a certain kind of liberal politics in normal times. But when it comes to the lead up to war, the oligarchy flexes, and they know it, and they all get in line, and they manufacture consent in ways that are sometimes subtle, although if you're looking for it, they're pretty darn obvious. Let's take a look at this clip from CNN.
Yeah, look, I think it's a complicated picture overall, but on this particular question, and overall, I feel like there's more support for Donald Trump's positions than is comically acknowledged. Oppose Iran getting a nuclear weapon. I mean, look at this. 79.
So he's got up on the screen. The question is, do you oppose Iran getting nuclear weapons? Well, who doesn't? But that's the question.
% of adults agree on that. They agree with Donald Trump.
79% agree.
Nuclear weapon. 83% of Republicans, 79% of independents, 79% of Democrats. When you get 79% of Democrats and 83% of Republicans agreeing on anything, you know that that position is the very clear majority in this country. And so the American public is with Donald Trump. They definitely oppose Iran getting nuclear weapon.
I mean, I'm surprised it's not higher. Who doesn't oppose Iran getting nuclear weapons? The idea that indicates some support for bombing Iran is absurd, especially when you get to the numbers later that he's buried. But once the attack happens, there's this conventional wisdom that there's going to be a rally around the flag, and these people endlessly push it. I mean, this doesn't just happen by itself. It's because of the way the media reports it. And if we have any hope, it's that people get their news by listening to people like us rather than people like them. If we have any hope to stop that from happening this time, let's listen more.
So this is a nuance here, but, Trump and Netanyahu both arguing that Iran is close to being capable of making a nuclear weapon. If that is the case, what is the feeling of...
Okay, notice, if that is the case, they do keep using the word if, because they're not factually wrong when they say if. If it's the case that Iran's about to get a nuclear weapon. But they never, in this entire segment, they never point out that Iran was not about to get a nuclear bomb. They're just speaking in this hypothetical universe of if Iran was about to get a nuclear bomb. And they say it over and over so that your brain starts to hear Iran was about to get a nuclear bomb, Iran was about to get a nuclear bomb. Multiply that across all the networks all the time.
Yeah, and then most people just, don't pay enough attention to be able to see past that. And, how could you blame them? They're busy making rent. They're busy taking care of their children. They don't have time to look past these clearly false statements. It's ridiculous.
All right, so I'm going to play some more of this. I think it's instructive, and it's good for all of us to exercise our muscles in hearing the way in which they're trying to change the way we all think.
Americans as to whether the United States should get involved in this conflict.
Right. If you buy Donald Trump's theory of the case, and I think that's important to note, this is polling from April. If Iran's trying to make a nuclear weapon, look at this. Overall, you get the slight plurality. I mean, it's within the margin of error, but the slight plurality of Americans actually favor U.S. airstrikes.
So if Iran's about to make a nuclear bomb, what it says on the screen is that 48% of Americans favor a U.S. airstrike, 47 oppose. So it's basically 50-50.
Compared to 47% opposing it. Now, here's the other nugget I'll note, right? There's been a lot of talk online and on social media and in podcasts of a divide within the Republican ranks. But here on this question, if Iran's trying to make a nuclear weapon, look at that. 69% of Republicans, the clear vast majority of Republicans, favor U.S. airstrikes on Iran, on their nuclear facilities. But there is this substantial minority, 27%, who oppose.
So on this question, if Iran's about to get a nuclear weapon, you do see that instinct that we in the past expected from members of the Republican Party, that they favor a more aggressive foreign policy. And so if Iran's about to have a nuclear weapon, there's a difference where 70% of Republicans favor airstrikes. Again, if, which we all know to be false. So we're dealing in a hypothetical that doesn't exist. That's not the world we live in, but it's one that both the respondents to this poll were asked to contemplate, and everybody watching this program has to contemplate over and over and over and over, to the point where what wasn't true comes to seem like truth.
So it's not surprising you're hearing those other voices besides Donald Trump out there. There are plenty of them in the Republican ranks who oppose the U.S. striking Iran if they're trying to make a nuclear weapon. But the clear majority of Republicans are with Donald Trump. If, in fact, Iran is trying to make nuclear weapons, they do, in fact, potentially favor U.S. airstrikes.
Do Americans prefer a sort of military action here or a diplomatic solution when it comes to Iran?
Right. So, we're talking about you can favor one thing, but you could also favor another thing more. So, yes, the U.S. public plurality and the vast majority of Republicans would favor U.S. airstrikes if Iran's trying to make a nuclear weapon. But what do they prefer? To limit the risk of Iran making nuclear weapons, the American public prefers what? They prefer a negotiated agreement. 69%.
So we're halfway through the segment, and you get your first indication, actually, they wanted to negotiate, which they pretended to be doing until Israel blew up the negotiating table, killed the lead negotiator.
Right.
Of the American public prefer a negotiated agreement as compared to 14% who prefer taking military action. I will note, Sarah Seidner, that this 69% includes 64% of Republicans. So even if Republicans, the clear majority, would in fact support airstrikes on Iran, U.S. airstrikes on Iran, they prefer a negotiated agreement.
And
he sounds almost reluctant to say it. And that's the other thing that happens towards the end of this segment is, as they're going to go through more and more of the evidence that Americans did not want Trump to attack Iran, they keep sort of raising the hope that that's all going to change, because they're hoping for this rally around the flag. That's what they're depending on.
It's exciting for the media to go to war, isn't it?
It's also exciting. It also generates ratings.
It's a good reminder that there is a documentary film called Manufacturing Consent. It came out in 1992. It's Noam Chomsky basically exploring the media. It might be a good time to rewatch.
Yeah, it's like endless clips of Chomsky talking. And there you have it. You have the manufacturing consent once again. Now, I just want to sit back and just look at this, because it happens so often that I think we take it for granted. And just because it's happened before doesn't mean it's not something that's just so profoundly dark, just so profoundly evil, that they would manufacture consent for war, that they would put us on the brink of who knows what's going to happen next. Because war isn't the kind of thing that they've got control over. Just because they're the ones in charge, don't think that they've got some kind of control over it. You just got to look at World War I. What sparked that war was really the spark that sparked World War II, which was an extension of World War I in a lot of ways. And it was the murder of an Austrian prince by a Serbian student, an obscure event in the middle of Europe, combined with the arrogance of the leaders of the various countries in Europe and then surrounding Europe who got involved. War has a logic that brings people in despite themselves. Trump doesn't know what Iran's going to do next. Nobody knows what Iran's going to do next. Iran might decide, for whatever reason, whether it's rational or irrational, to expand the war into Iraq. Iran might decide they want a ground war. They might march across Iraq to Israel. We don't know what they're going to do. It doesn't seem likely that they would do that. But Iran's got 90 million people. They could field quite an army. Israel, on the other hand, has got 9 million, 1/10 of the population of Iran. What would it take to stop something like that? You can't assume that your adversary is going to act rationally in every case. The Trump administration certainly isn't acting rationally.
Right. You never know what's going to happen next year.
The dark, the evil of this is astounding. And I'm sorry, but it requires all of us to get off the couch and do something. Meanwhile, while we're all paying attention to Iran, Gaza has become... I just want to read here what Susie Hansen just wrote in New York Magazine. It's an amazing piece. I'll link to it in the show notes. You got to read it because it's distilling the horror that's been created in Gaza. Here's what she writes. In the 1980s, the American philosopher Edith Wishgrad recognized that the Holocaust and Hiroshima and other crises in which huge numbers of people had died required a new language. In her 1985 book, Spirit in Ashes, she called them death events. These, she wrote, could be large-scale bombing campaigns, forced famines, or deportations. Most important, these man-made events were collective global experiences and involved the shared knowledge that people have made the extinction of mankind possible. In some cases, these events gave rise to something she called the death world, which had the imagined conditions of death conferring upon their inhabitants the status of the living dead. Wishgrad had the Nazi camps in mind. Today, the death world we know is Gaza.
Chilling.
Completely chilling.
And it is a death world. Aid is not getting in. People are still hungry. We should not forget that they had a complete blockade on aid and they are still weaponizing aid, bringing in too little, too few distribution points. And when people come to try to get a bag of flour, they are shot at.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, the distribution points themselves are the most dangerous in all of Gaza because, every other day they're killing 30, 50, 60 people at these so-called humanitarian aid points.
It's a death world.
I know that Israel has been gunning for a bombing campaign on Iran for a long time, but I have to wonder why right now, why this moment? One of the many reasons has to be that they want to divert the attention of the world from the horrors that they are inflicting upon Gazans.
Yeah, I mean, they are a truly rogue nuclear-armed state. And, there's no really telling what they're capable of doing and what they will do next.
And in the New York Times, the headline says, "No U.S. decision on joining the war yet, though it could come in days," Israeli officials say.
Right. So the Israeli officials know about the internal decision-making process of the United States. It's time to end the stranglehold that both the war machine and the Israel lobby have got on policymaking in the United States. It's come to a nightmare.
And let's put it into perspective. It is a tiny country. It's like the entire population of Israel is about the population of
Tennessee,
the state of Tennessee.
Or the city of New York.
And to be clear, it has a stranglehold over the United States in part because it serves the interests of the war machine. It serves the interests of the oligarchy behind the war machine because the war machine is a machine for producing profits. So make your voice heard right now. Again, we've got those action alerts. I'll put them up high in the show notes. I really urge you to make your voice heard on this issue. There is some hope among everyday Americans, but also among Democrats and some Republicans. There's a bipartisan resolution to deny Trump the power to make unilateral war. It's endorsed by Republican Tom Massey, who's been incredible in trying to prevent a war with Iran. You got Ro Khanna out there calling out Chuck Schumer, putting pressure on him, together with the squad. And even Hakeem Jeffries and Schumer have had to come out with statements criticizing Trump's unilateral aggressive attack on Iran. So the political fight is joined. Let's end this nightmare. Let's prevent it from getting worse. And once you've done all that, come visit us at theleftunsaid.net. Join our mailing list. Make sure you're subscribed wherever you're listening. Give us a rating or review, and we will come back, hopefully with a jollier, more bantery, fun episode in a week.
See you.
All right, take care, y'all.